Hi everyone. Today we are going to be talking about the American Revolution. Last lesson was taxes and conflicts, so we're going to transition directly from those conflicts that the colonists are facing into what becomes the Revolutionary War. So our warm-up is going to be an excerpt from this document, Common Sense by Thomas Paine. Please take a moment to pause and read the excerpt I have on here to yourself. I want you to think about what is the main idea and what does Thomas Paine think the colonists should do. Once you've had time to pause and read this to yourself, let's pull out some text evidence to support our ideas. So the main idea here is that the king has become too powerful. And what Thomas Paine wants is a revolution, is complete independence from Great Britain. So let's see what our evidence is. There's something absurd in supposing a continent to be perpetually governed by an island. Perpetually means like forever. Continent being what becomes the United States, and island being Great Britain. So they think it's crazy or absurd that the United States, or what is at current time of this writing, the colonies, to always be under government from Great Britain. They think that eventually this split is going to happen. So why not now? They also compare King George III to a pharaoh. And this would be taken as an insult to the king because he is being shown through this writing as like too powerful, overbearing, that he is not listening to his people at all. And he says that reconciliations, that means like forgiveness or making amends, is no longer possible. So Thomas Paine is saying that he once thought that reconciliation was possible, but after the Battle of Lexington and Concord, he decided he's done. There's no going back. Now we need to be completely independent from Great Britain. So as we go into today, keep in mind that next time it's going to be about the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. So that's a bit of a giveaway that the colonists are going to win and are going to need some help in forming their next government. So that was our warm-up on common sense. Now we will do some notes on the Revolutionary War, including a debate on the war if you are in class in person with me, and a gallery walk on the battles of the Revolutionary War for same format. Our exit ticket is going to be about continuity and change. Continuity meaning what stays the same before and after the Revolutionary War finishes, and of course, what changes in contrast. Our essential question for the day is, how did the Enlightenment shape the war for independence? So we'll review again what the Enlightenment is. We touched on this a bit last time. So this is where we left off last class. We were talking about some events that are leading up to the Revolutionary War. The French and Indian War being a war that created extreme taxes for the colonists because war creates debt. The British felt that they really fought in the French and Indian War for the benefit of the colonists, since the colonists gained land access from it. And therefore, they want the colonists to pay for it through some new taxes. And those that the colonists were most upset about included the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, and the Townshend Acts. Colonists are upset about these, but something that begins to antagonize the British or make the British really seem like an evil force here is the Boston Massacre, where 5 colonists die. And this helps to recruit more of the colonists to be on board towards these more extreme protests and boycotts, such as the Boston Tea Party. Eventually, we're going to see this Declaration for Independence. There's about 3 years in between here. And one of the things that happens in those 3 years is the publication of Common Sense. So Common Sense is also moving more people towards independence because a lot of people are still at this point hoping to avoid war. Paine is going to argue in this pamphlet that it's, quote, common sense. The colonists need to stand up to the king, stand up for themselves as a nation, that this is no longer a little catfight over taxes. This is a struggle for freedom. This is representative of all of mankind. So here's a practice multiple choice. Go ahead and pause, read it to yourself, and choose what you think is the best answer. In Common Sense, what does Thomas Paine suggest the American colonies should do? declare independence from England. He is no longer willing to negotiate. So one of the Enlightenment thinkers that Thomas Paine draws on, and other of the patriots from this time draw from, is John Locke. So he is an Enlightenment thinker. He has these new ideas that help to govern how people think. And one of his ideas is that he favors self-government over absolute monarchy. So he wants to encourage people to set up their own governments where they have more control over those governments. He also discusses some natural rights, such as life, liberty, and property. And we'll see Thomas Jefferson borrow this line in the Declaration when he says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He talks more about these rights and how people need to respect one another's rights, and one of the government's roles is to protect those rights for their people. He also talks about how the government represents a social contract between the ruler and the people. So if the government is not protecting the natural rights, the people, the colonists in this case, have the right to overthrow the government, because the government only has power because of the people. So this is an example of our enduring issue, impacts of ideas and beliefs. So we see these Enlightenment thinkers having extreme impact, not only on what becomes the United States, but also on revolutions around the world. During this era, we see the French Revolution. We're going to see upcoming revolutions in Latin America, and in many of the countries, they draw on these Enlightenment thinkers. So common sense was drawing on these Enlightenment thinkers, and with many of the pamphlets sold, many of the colonists became convinced that we should declare independence. And that's one of the reasons that Franklin, Adams, and Jefferson get together to write this declaration officially and have it signed on July 4th, 1776. So even though they've signed this declaration, some people are still against the war. Last time we talked about England's advantages. They have a professional militia, they have sophisticated equipment, and a strong commander-in-chief. However, we see as this war begins that the Second Continental Congress's choice of George Washington also becomes a really strong commander, and the colonies become more united in establishing their own currency, for example. These advantages that England has still seem much stronger at the beginning of this war, and that could be one of the reasons that the Loyalists want to stay loyal to Great Britain, whereas the Patriots are wanting independence from Great Britain, and we also have people who are neutral. If you're in class with me, we're going to transition from here into a little debate, but I'm going to skip that engagement for the purposes of the video. So Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence explains exactly why the colonies want to separate from Britain, lists all of the wrongs that the colonists believe the king did to them, and the rights that the newly independent states would have. Next, I'm going to have us do a gallery walk around the room if you're with me in person to learn about the battles of the Revolutionary War. If you are with me, we'll transition into that at this point. I'm not going to have slides on that in the video here. So you'll get those from your graphic organizer from class if you're in my class. Therefore, since you're going to learn about all of the battles from that note sheet, we're going to jump right to the end of the war with the Treaty of Paris of 1783. So through this treaty, Britain is forced to recognize American independence, recognize that it becomes its own country. The Loyalists would not be punished after this treaty, and the British people and the American people would have to pay each other any money that they owed one another. Any British soldiers that were still stationed in what is now the United States would have to move away. So we just talked about how England had a lot more advantages. How did the colonies win? They had the home field advantage. They knew the land. They didn't have to wait for supplies to sail from across the ocean. They also had new war tactics, including guerrilla warfare, which they learned from Native American people. And George Washington, as we mentioned, proved to be a great general. Help from the French after the Battle of Saratoga really, really stole the win here as well. And the Americans were extremely motivated towards winning. So when we talk about this enduring issue of impact of ideas and beliefs, we want to rotate back to this. How does this idea help the colonists win the Revolutionary War? In this discussion, we should be referencing the Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke and their impact on colonists such as Thomas Paine, and how they convinced people to support the revolution. So we have three areas that the Revolutionary War impacted that we are going to discuss here. We're going to talk about social, political, and economic. Social rights change for example, women. So we have some examples of women being more involved in the revolution, such as Molly Pitcher, or also known as Mary Hayes. After her husband dies, she fights in the battle for the patriots, for the colonists, and symbolizes how women are getting more involved throughout the battles. In Massachusetts after the war, women are allowed to own property, and in New Jersey, women get the right to vote for a short time. However, overall, women did not gain many rights. So I have a question up here I want you to consider through the remainder of the slides. Revolution means a society-wide change. So we want to be thinking about here, is this truly a revolution? Is this enough change to make it a revolution, to categorize it as a revolution? So is this a revolution for slavery? Many enslaved people fought on the side of the British and therefore left for England after the war with the British as the British soldiers returned to England. There were some significant anti-slavery movements that formed during this time around the Revolution, such as the Philadelphia Anti-Slavery Society. However, most enslaved people remained enslaved after this war. There were some movements towards some slave owners emancipating their enslaved people, but overall, things are staying the same. And for those who are free, Vermont did allow free Black people to vote, but they did still face discrimination. And in some states, still only white male property owners could vote. Some states require you to be a member of a church to vote. So eventually, these property religious qualifications are going to be removed, but we know that in terms of racial identity, we do not see equality in this area for quite some time. So let's have a little discussion. Was the American Revolution actually a revolution? It was probably considered a revolution in terms of the government change. Is it a revolution in terms of social change? Even political change? Political change in terms of who is voting, who is having the power here. So when we were talking about like the local governments within the colonies, it was often white property owning males. So is it much of a change that's happening in terms of who has the political power, even though now they get to vote for a whole new system of government? So next time we're going to talk about the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. And the system of government is most certainly a huge change. So if you think that alone creates a revolution, then I think you would argue, of course, this American Revolution was certainly a revolution. But I look forward to having that discussion a little bit more in class here. Now we have our first presentations. We're doing this unit-wide activity where each day people will present on a woman who they researched. So today we're going to learn about Deborah Sampson, Ann Bates, and Esther Daybert Reed. For our exit ticket today, I want you to answer just the simple question, which battle was a turning point? This is a check-in. What made it a turning point? And of course, this question of continuity and change that I mentioned earlier, and this has to do with the most recent few slides. What changed? What stayed the same before and after the Revolutionary War? So if you were listening to our class discussion that we hopefully have on this slide. Hopefully you do super well with that exit ticket. Thank you guys so much for participating today.